let's go on to a heresy. A heresy called Modalistic Monarchianism. Ooh, fun. Or modalism for short. Modalists understand God in a different way, as one source that takes on three roles. A person then describes the role that each one plays. I have an illustration for that one as well. That's a shamrock. Anybody heard the clover as an analogy for the Trinity? Slightly problematic. Let's see why. Well, what is God? We know God first as the creator of the creation. But then creation goes wrong, horribly wrong. It's not enough for God to be the creator of creation. God is going to have to take on a new relationship with creation, that of Redeemer, the Redeemer of creation. So, according to, for instance, Sabellians, who were modalists in the first few centuries, first God takes on the persona, the role of creator, and then when creation goes haywire, thanks to us, God takes on the role of Redeemer, sets things right. But then, we're not where God intended creation to be. We're not renewed and made perfect until God takes on a third relationship with creation, that of sanctifier, or sustainer, sometimes people call it, bringing creation to its intended end. New heavens, new earth, new creation, etc. That is, according to modalists, what it means that God is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. All right? Father to creation as the creator. Son to creation as the Redeemer. And Holy Spirit as its sanctifier. Why did the church reject modalism? What's wrong with this picture? Maybe it's one you've heard. Maybe it's one you've grown up with. Well, what does it mean to be a person? Let's start there. What does it mean to be a person in this schema? It's one leaf here, one shamrock, taking on three expressions. Like an actor might play more than one role in a story. Think of Mike Myers in Austin Powers. He takes on more than one role. Is that problematic? That God would be taking on three roles or three actions with respect to the audience? If we had not sinned, would we have needed a Redeemer? No. We could have done without the second person of the so-called Trinity, right? God wouldn't have needed to take on that role. So the number 3 here isn't really about who God is. The number 3 here is circumstantial. It has to do with how God chose to act. And that's to say that God isn't really, truly, essentially in 3 persons. These are dispensable roles. Think of the masks of an actor, the personae. Christians are firm on knowing God personally and truly in Jesus Christ, right? We know God in Jesus Christ. But if all you know is a role, all you know is a part that's being taken with respect to you, do you really know the actor? In the world of theater, sometimes you do and sometimes you don't. I get a feeling like I know Keanu Reeves' personality pretty well, because it seems to come out about the same in every movie. You know? Whoa. I don't get the feeling he had to stretch really far to be in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. That came pretty naturally. Now that's not quite fair to Keanu Reeves, intentionally so. He was also in a really great movie called Little Buddha. Has anybody seen Little Buddha? It's the story of Siddhartha. It's the story of Buddhism. If you want a snapshot, if you want a quick tour of the logic of Buddhism, watch Little Buddha. And he is Siddhartha, Keanu Reeves. And he pulls it off. He's a better actor than I gave him credit for a minute ago. And if you had seen him in Little Buddha, I don't think you'd get a sense of his personality in the same way. So sometimes actors become character actors. They just be themselves on the screen, and you have a sense of who they are. Other times they take on roles that are profoundly different than who they are. An example there, a kind of scary example, is Jim Carrey in a movie called The Man on the Moon. It's the story of Andy Kaufman, a comedian from the 70s, who was Ladka on the sitcom Taxi. This is all ancient history. I just sound old to you. I know. A very off-the-wall comedian, Andy Kaufman. And the movie, The Man on the Moon, is the story of the comedian. And Jim Carrey took on the role so personally, so completely, that Andy Kaufman's widow was on the set for some of the filming of the movie. And when she was talking to Jim Carrey, she said, sometimes I didn't know if I was talking to Jim or Andy. And that's her husband she's talking about. Jim Carrey's a good actor. He can so assume the persona of one of his roles that the non-fictional persona's wife can see her husband in him. Now, if that's what kind of actor God is, do we really know God in Jesus Christ? Or do we only know how God chooses to face us and display himself to us as Redeemer? I mentioned earlier, some Christians have a sense that the Father is nasty, but the Son is nice. That could look Arian. It could also look modalistic, where these relationships are really occasional relationships rather than true expressions of being. What else is wrong with this? Well, what's happening when Jesus is praying? When he's praying to the Father? According to modalism, he's talking to himself. Because there's no personal difference between the Son and the Father. They are just one person in 2 or 3 roles. Is that really what it means for Jesus to pray? Is he talking to himself? See, he represents the Father as other to him. But that can't be in this framework. Or Sabellian modalists also taught this as a sequential relationship. First, in time, God is Father. And then, in the New Testament, God becomes Son. And then, after Jesus' resurrection and ascension, God becomes Holy Spirit and descends as the Holy Spirit. So what we're seeing is a sequence of God taking on 3 discrete parts in time. In that case, what does it mean that Jesus is praying? What's he doing? Leaving voicemail? The living, active relationship of Father and Son cannot be honored by a framework like this. One more problem. Well, more than one. Who's on the cross? Is just the part on the cross? Is Jesus only acting? Or is God simply on the cross? The one person on the cross. Modalists were accused of crucifying the Father along with the Son because they refused to distinguish the person of the Father from the person of the Son. In the gospel story, Jesus on the cross is saying, Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. Modalism doesn't allow Jesus to relate to God as other. on the cross. So it's not just the Son who dies, it's the Father and the Spirit who die. The whole, the one person of God dies. In which case, who raises him? Watch as you go through heresies, Trinitarian heresies, Christological heresies, ecclesiological heresies. Watch what happens to the cross. Every time the cross has to be spun or distorted into meaning something other than what it really does. That's really the litmus test for a heresy. Does it garble the cross and therefore garble the good news? All right? And the last one. Who is God apart from creation? Apart from creation, God is not creator, redeemer, sustainer. God is not Father, Son, Holy Spirit. God is simply an undifferentiated unity. And that means that God needs creation to be Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Which means these relationships aren't really about God at all. Here, God is not the Father of the Son. God's the Father of creation. Here, to call God Father is a synonym for calling God Creator. But in the Gospel of Matthew, that's not how Jesus portrays it. No one knows the Father but the Son, and those whom the Son chooses to reveal him. No one knows the Son but the Father. The Son is how the Father is our Father. He's not our Father just because we're creatures. He's our Father because Jesus has graced us into his relationship of sonship, adopted us, so that we can call God Abba, our Father. Another couple of modalistic illustrations I want to show you. Take a substance like H2O, freeze it, it becomes ice, it acts differently. Melt it, it becomes liquid, acts differently. Heat it up more or put it under the right pressure, it becomes steam and acts differently. One substance, three forms, but that's not the Trinity. That's modalism. See, I think a lot of our confusion and mystification and avoidance of the doctrine of the Trinity is baggage from having learned poor and unworkable analogies for it. If you want to know how God is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, don't go to the fridge and don't go to the garden. Go to the story of Jesus. And only in the story of Jesus will you see the God that his followers saw. Only in the story of Jesus will you truly see Father, Son, and Holy Spirit for who they are.